Good morning. All morning. Working. Okay. I can tell you how excited I am to be here. And we were just looking in the directory. I didn't realize I'm going to member this chapter for 30 years. Many of you favorite relative. So much sensible guidance. It really isn't too much to be created with all of you. So let me start with, you can see that, as Barbara said, you came to my house. Glorious days. After the day in November 1, the great COVID. We moved about 3 months ago. That one directive I gave to our decorator was, I want that cake on display in my homes. So if any of you get to come and visit, please come and you will see it. It would be so simple. I never miss the opportunity. There's a whole lot I could talk to you about, but I was thinking over the last 4 or 5 months now, what is really relevant to you all? People ask me all the time, well, how did you ever get in the Navy? Because back in the 60s, nice girls didn't join the Navy. You joined the Navy if you wanted a husband. I mean, there are all kinds of old saws out there about why women. Actually, seldom did people say, well, I'm really glad you joined the Navy because it gives us an opportunity for you to serve the nation, which really was part of my motivation. My mother was an artist, a crazy artist, and she had to drop out of school, go down to school of design, and she never quite got over it. She was very successful. Discrimination in it. But from I was one of the oldest of 5. From my very youngest days, the continuing refrain was get your education, get your college degree, and then you can get married, you can have children, you can do whatever you want. But the college degree was so essential. And truly, I don't remember a time when she wasn't, quote, mentoring me. Example of my Aunt Barbara. She had dropped out of college when she was a young woman, married Jerry, who came back from World War II, and Normandy, D-Day, and so on. And she had 1 year to go. And at the age of, I think it was 52, she went back to college, finished her degree. So I had a lot of good mentoring, both directly from her, but also. So I went off to college, as was the plan. I went to a small liberal arts college in California, Occidental College. And early on, I was going to be the world's greatest Asian scholar. I fell in love with Asian history and politics. I was going to get a PhD, and I was going to teach college. That was all I ever wanted to do about my maybe freshman year on. So in order to accomplish that goal, I was in a PhD track, going to University of Michigan. The problem was I had to learn Japanese, and that was a little hard to find back in 1968. So I found a program that would require me to graduate from college, go to the ceremony, run to the LA airport, fly in the overnight plane to Chicago, drive up to Wisconsin, Madison, and start an intensive Japanese language program. No problem at all. I decided, I was so organized too, I'm compulsively organized. So I decided to use Easter weekend in 1968 to visit friends, to say goodbye, to be leaving the area on this my grand plan. I went to Oxnard, California, about 60 miles north of Los Angeles. In those days, there was an evening paper, the Oxnard Press Courier, and Saturday night, they had a military page. And there was, on that military page that night, a picture of a woman naval officer. The first woman naval officer to be assigned to the local base, the Construction Battalion Center at Fort Romini. And I don't know what happened. I mean, it was just like a lightning strike. I thought, oh, I wonder what that would be like. I mean, I couldn't imagine what it would be like. I mean, it must be an adventure and so on. So I thought about it all Easter Sunday. I can't tell you what the sermon is about that day in church, but and I decided by the end of the weekend that it was the stupidest, craziest idea. I had 2 acceptances PhD programs, and there was no way I was going to derail that. I was also another fact. I was a little bit younger. I had barely turned 20, so I was graduating a little bit early. So I couldn't get it out of my mind. So I said, well, I'm going to call the Navy recruiter just to convince myself it's the stupidest idea that's ever come into my head. So she said, well, come see me. I went to see her on Tuesday. Stunning blonde woman. She just was larger than life. She had an enormous diamond ring on. So education, served in the Navy, I'm engaged. I mean, it all kind of fit together. And it's 1968. Some of you remember those years. That was what we all did, right? I mean, it was the expectation. So I said, well, let me think about it. And I thought about it for about 45 seconds. And I said, well, okay, I'll file the paperwork. And what really convinced me, I think, was education. The Navy was promoting education. So I had to graduate. She made it very clear if I didn't graduate in 6 weeks, it was no deal. I thought that was good. Travel, equal pay. I thought in those days, of course, naval officers got equal pay. It was published in the Congressional Record, so there was no doubt about that. I thought that was pretty cool. And my commitment was only 2 years. So I would be 22, and timing would be such that I could start the fall semester at graduate school in 1970, and I would get the GI Bill. So it's a no-brainer, right? It's a no-brainer. And when I made the decision, I went to see a college professor that I was working for part-time. And he sat me down and he said, you know, you can live a life where you're kind of close to he says, think about a pencil and a string. And you can either live a life where you're right at that juncture where the string is connected to the pencil and you don't get knocked around at all. He said, it might be pretty boring, maybe. Or you can be out at the end of the string and, this. And I really kind of like that metaphor that, maybe there's some adventure here. And he was the one that said, you really do have choices. You don't think you do have to go off in this graduate school thing, but you can have a wild ride and you can still accomplish goals. So off I went to officer training that summer of '68. And I was commissioned an ensign in the United States Naval Reserve on the 23rd of August. And that started the great adventure. Now my time clock started that day, so 2 years from that day. Well, I went off. I was stationed in Washington. That was about the last time I wore my uniform, because in those days in Washington, war, we didn't wear uniforms. So I was stationed at the Defense Intelligence Agency. I didn't wear my uniform and I only worked with civilians. So I really didn't have a typical Navy experience, but I had my plan. So spring of '70, 2 years later, I was ready to go off to graduate school, and they had held my admission open, so no problem. So I was so naive. I got a phone call from the personnel headquarters in those days. I was a lieutenant now, lieutenant junior grade. Would you be willing to stay in the Navy for 2 more years because we have a job that we'd like to send you to in Tokyo. Tokyo. It took me about 45 seconds to decide that I could defer my graduate plan and go to Tokyo. And I was stationed on a naval air station there. And at that time I was the only officer. It was a great experience. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a little more about the career, but I want to tell you a little bit about the history of women in the Navy. The women in the Navy associated with the Navy really started in the Civil War. In 1862, the Navy acquired Red Rover, which was a hospital ship, and they recruited some sisters, nursing sisters, to staff the hospital ship. So that really is the first sort of official. Now, we know from history and BAR discussions that women served, women supported, women took the place of their husbands when the thick of battle happened. But officially, the first Navy women were those nurses serving on the Red Rover. And of course, after World War II, I mean, the Civil War, it went away. So in 1917, the Navy Secretary Josephus Daniels said, "Is there any reason why we can't have women doing some of these clerical and administrative jobs? And then we can augment the ranks and men can go to sea." So they recruited Yeoman F. Yeoman is the Navy's term for administrative support. And then it had a F in parentheses. But very soon they were called yeomanettes. And it's pretty exciting when you talk to it. At least when I first came into the Navy, there were several still alive, and they had great adventures that they related to us. So after the 11,000 served, then the demobilization occurred, and we had the interwar years, and World War II now is in progress. And so in July of 42, the women accepted volunteer emergency service. That was law was signed by President Roosevelt. Anybody here know that women accepted volunteer emergency service was what the acronym was? No, yeah. So I didn't either when I joined the Navy. It took me a while to learn that. The 81,000 served, including 72 African Americans. And after the war, why do we need women in the Navy anymore? We don't. We're demobilizing. And so the women were sent home. And by September of 46, substantially all of the women were gone, back home, doing whatever it was. But happily, there were a couple of senior officers who said, maybe we ought to keep a few of them around, just a few, so that, we could kind of use their talents, and they didn't perform badly, so let's keep a few. And so they lobbied, and in 1948, President Truman signed the Women Armed Services Integration Act, which opened the way for all the services to continue to recruit and have women in the ranks. Now the Navy was clever. They said, well, we can have women, but we don't want too many of them. So they put a cap of 2%. And when I joined in 68, this was still the governing legislation. So there were 500 women officers when I joined, and about 2,000 enlisted women. Only shore duty assignments, no combat. And the problem in the Navy is that you have a lot of jobs that technically aren't direct combat, but they happen to be located in combat units. So if you're a medical person or a clerical person, but it happens to be on a ship, you are in a combat unit. So that basically kept every Navy woman off a ship until the 70s. Now, what happened in the 70s was critical. When the draft ended, up to that point, they had been turning away women who wanted to go into the Navy. So In the 70s, you had to already have a high school education before they even talked to you, and that wasn't the case. Women had to have their parents' permission until they were 21, and they really discouraged women who were under 21 from joining. And they turned away a lot of women that were as qualified as men. And the men who were coming in the Navy, not everyone, but many of them, came in the Navy because they didn't want to be drafted. So in 1973, the Pentagon planners said, oh, wait a minute, we have a pool of qualified women that we turn away, and now we can't get enough men because there's no longer a draft. Maybe, just maybe, we'll bring in a few of those women. So they opened the floodgate. Well, not really a flood because it was very slow ramping up. But they said, okay, bring more women in. And then they said, oh, wait a minute. We have those, in case of women officers, we have those 500 or so jobs that are generally filled by women. What are we going to do with these additional women? So they had to find new jobs. And so they opened new jobs. And what happened to me was, because I had been in the Navy for a while, I became competitive for some of those new jobs. So as Bart said in the introduction, you know, I did jobs that men hadn't done before. But I did have a job that only had been available to men until the early 70s, and that's White House social aid. So when I came back from Japan to get out of the Navy, came back to Washington for duty because I was kind of liking it now. I had a really nice job. I was assigning male officers to seagoing officers to sea. I was in the HR business at that point. And somebody contacted me and said, would you agree to interview to be the second woman Navy social aid president? This was President Nixon. And it's a second job. So it wasn't appealing to everybody. You do your regular job and then you're available to go to the White House and work on different social occasions. Well, obviously the White House takes precedence, and that became very interesting during Watergate. So my first White House event was when the Shah of Iran came to visit President Nixon, and that was in the spring of '73. Well, you know what happened later on, ensuing months. The interesting thing was that the frenzy of social activities leading up to President Nixon's resignation was absolutely remarkable. They wanted to show the White House was operating normally. So any group that wanted to have a reception by the president or the first lady could pretty much get it. So we were over there a lot for different receptions and so on. And the fun thing or interesting thing was in the White House, you had the hearings going on the TV, Sam Urban and all of that, but you never said the W word in the White House. And I mean, it was like a bubble. You'd go in, oh, it's totally normal. It's absolutely normal. So when Nixon left, the first woman social aid left as well to be on the transition staff. And so I became the senior Navy social aid. And it was kind of fun because I had been, you know, relegated to escort the vice president and his wife when they would come to events. And now he's the president. So it was, yeah, that's my first, that was the first photo. There was a comment made here that only good, nice, flattering photos of DAR members appear in the newsletter. Well, if you're in a photo with the president and it's a flattering photo of the president, you will get a copy of it. So that, they don't care what you look like, but the president looked pretty good, and William P. Rogers was Secretary of State, and Mrs. Nixon was a remarkable woman. She was the one who did heavy lifting in this whole social frenzy that was going on. And she had a gift that that I think was so special. When she met someone in a receiving line with 100 people, she would look them in the eye, shake their hand, and she would make that person feel like she had waited her entire life to meet you. It was astounding. And I would stand next to her in a receiving line. People would sometimes, come up and they would become statues. They were so excited to be there and transfixed. And there'd always be an aide there to pull the person off. Keep the line moving. So it was a real bird's eye view of the real challenge. I mean, she was working extremely hard, but it was a real privilege. And then my last just before then, I had been selected for a Navy graduate school program. So, which I didn't plan it, but the plan came together. The Navy was sending me to graduate school for a couple of years, and I went off to Fletcher School at Tufts, and was very interested in strategy. So I was sent for a couple of years to delve into that topic, and it was quite fun. And the Fords, at this point, I'd been around them quite a bit, so they made a special point of having a nice photo where all three of us looked pretty good. So I went off to graduate school, and at this point, the most people I had ever had in my area of responsibility, direct responsibility, was 8, which for a naval officer of that tenure was a problem, because as I grew up in the service and climbed the ranks, I needed to have more experience with teams and larger organizations. So I went from 8 in a small office in Japan, and then had all independent duty after that, and then went off to graduate school in 75, and then 77 went to London to do strategy and plans in Europe and in the Middle East. So I got directly involved in things like the fall of the Shah of Iran, evacuating Americans from Bandar Abbas, port in Iran, Gaddafi and his craziness back in those days, planning operations, which served me in good stead later. But along the way, I had the opportunity to do a 1-year fellowship at the Treasury Department, which was a fun experience. So, as I mentioned, I didn't have much experience with large groups. So finally, it became apparent that I really needed to get on with leading large groups of people. So the Navy decided to make me second in command of an all-male boot camp. Now, it happened to be in San Diego. So I was sort of thrilled. I'll tell you, as I drove across country, I can remember my knuckles getting whiter and whiter, tighter and tighter around the steering wheel as I thought of the implications of this. So on the way, I called a woman officer who was a little bit senior to me, and had a couple of large jobs like that. And I asked her, I said, so how do you deal with this? How do you learn how to manage, lead 500 people? And the people I was going to be leading were largely shipboard sailors. They were coming ashore for their shore duty jobs. So they were enginemen, machinist mates, hull technicians, a lot of the engineering rates that the Navy keeps sea duty for 5-6 years at a time, and then they get to come ashore for 2 years. And I think this was the best advice that she could have given me. Press on regardless, is what she said. And I've passed this on when I've talked with NJROTC students in high schools and ROTC in college. And that's what she said. You got to get up every morning. You got to press on. You don't get the luxury of relaxing and saying, well, I'll figure this out tomorrow. You press on regardless. So that's been one of my mottos. So I went through that experience of 500 people, and they taught me more than I could have ever provided them. They taught me how to take care of sailors, take care of their people. They taught me what was really important. You know, in the Navy, there are huge volumes of regulation. I mean, pages, there are shelves of regulations telling everybody exactly how everything is supposed to be done. And one of the things I learned is that you've got to keep your head engaged when you think about those regulations, and you've got to be attentive to those times when it doesn't make sense. Follow the regulation. Now, sometimes you got to step out and, you know, you put your career in jeopardy perhaps, but occasionally there are those important moments where it's important that you stand up and say, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, and plot a different course, have a different solution. And that happened vividly for me when I happened to be the officer in command when the San Francisco earthquake happened on Treasure Island. And this was, the Navy finally decided it was time to make a woman a commanding officer of a naval base station. So they gave me Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay, which was kind of like the brass ring in such a place. And I also had Hunters Point Shipyard, and the earthquake happened. Well, it destroyed so much of our housing on the island and really made a mess of things. And the middle of the night, the city of South San Francisco called the command center where I was. And they said, the city manager said, we don't have power here. And we know that if you send a Navy ship over to our pier and you hook up the Navy ship to the generator, the power driver there on the pier, that we can light the city of South San Francisco. Well, my boss was down in San Diego, and his number 2 was my same pay grade captain. And so I called and I said, you know, in the whole response to the earthquake, we're keeping our bosses informed about what we're doing. And so I called and I said, they've asked us to send a ship. We have a Navy Reserve small destroyer that could get a crew on board, send it over, sail it across. It takes about an hour to get it over there. And this captain says, don't do it. It won't work. It will waste fuel money. It's not the right thing to do. It's going to be embarrassing. And all I could think of was, Navy refuses city's urgent request. Headline in the San Francisco Chronicle. And so what if it didn't work? I mean, we were all doing things that night, the next number of weeks. We were all doing things that may work or may not work. And I said, well, thank you for that advice, but we're sending the ship over. And about 2 or 3 hours, the city of South San Francisco was lit up again, and it worked. But, you know, we didn't know it was going to work at the time, but it was the right thing to do. And the other thing that happened that night, again, an example of how you have to do the right thing all the time. We lost all the gas, the natural gas on the island. So that's how people cooked their food. They all had gas stoves in their 1,100 units of family housing. So that was turned off. And, you know, they had kids, and, you know, we had to start figuring out a plan on how we were going to feed all the people on the island. And we got a call from Hawaii, which was a much higher headquarters in Hawaii. And this officious person says, now remember, for every person who is not a uniformed member, not a sailor or an officer, so that meant dependents, people that were relief workers that were, you know, from the utilities and so on that were fixing things. For every one of them, you've got to charge this additional charge. And again, the guy said, oh, that's the wrong thing to do. I said, look, I said, we have families, we have kids. I've got to do it. I didn't get fired, but it just brought home the point that when people are in leadership positions, they're expected to do some discriminating, checks and make sure that even in implementing regulations that you do things right, and then pay the consequences later, but you know it's the right thing to do. And I always tell young people that if you make the little moral decisions, the little teeny ones that come day to day, then when you have a big one made, you'll have had experience, you'll have had practice. So it's like when you do your weight training, you lift little weights first and you get to the big weights. Well, you'll be ready for the big weight when it comes. This was a fun night. I'll tell you, Navy Night at the Stick was always one of the most fun events. The city came out. We had a grand time. And the first year when I was there and did it the first time, I found a guy who was a really good pitcher. He played AAA ball, and he was my coach. Honest, I could not have thrown a ball. So pitched a ball. So I was all excited because we practiced with the full distance between the pitcher's mound and the catcher. And we go out there and he says, the guy escorting me out says, "Oh, you got to walk up here and throw it from here." I was so aggravated. A social event a number of months later, my husband meets Bob Lurie. He was the owner of the San Francisco Giants. And I have a great husband. He's never short on words when it really matters. So he says, "I got to talk to you about my wife." And he told the whole story. So the next year, I don't have the picture, but the next year in '91, I threw from the pictures. So as Barb mentioned, I got involved in the post tailhook. I think enough time now, that was 91, I believe. Enough time has passed that there are a lot of people who don't even know what tailhook is. But for those of you of a certain age, back in the early 90s, it was on the front page of every Macy's. Sexual assault, horrible things. People who were there had their promotions held up, even if they weren't involved in any of the bad stuff that went on. So, make a long story short, after I was selected for promotion, the 1-star customarily get a new job, and my new job was to be the executive director of the task force to address the tailhook issues. And I have to tell you, I was furious. I wasn't at tailhook. I didn't intend to go. I wasn't involved in any of that stuff. But that taught me that sometimes you got to do what the Navy wants you to do, needs you to do, and you've got to embrace the opportunity. And it all worked out in the sense that I think many, if not most, Navy people were horrified at what had happened and sad about the public reaction and how the Navy's reputation was so tainted by all of this. So I think there was a lot of energy around figuring out what the real problems were. And the real breakthrough came when we said, under the Armed Services, the Immigration Act, and the one that was signed back in the 70s, women still were not allowed to serve in combat. There were a few women that could train aviators, but it was always in a training role, not actually serving in the units. So, and women certainly couldn't be on ships, so they had opened some opportunities on some ships that were totally non-combatant kind of ships, the hospital ships, some oilers, the ships that bring oil, gas, and so on. So we had a vision, if you will, that one of the big issues in tailhook was that there was a first-class team and a second-class team. And guess who were the second-class team members? They were women. No matter how competent they were, no matter what tough jobs they did, they weren't in the frontline force. So we said, well, Are women qualified? Well, of course they are. You know, what are your standards? They could pass the standards easily in many cases. Could they be trained? Yeah, we had women training combat aviators in the training squadron. So, the real breakthrough from that job was the Secretary of the Navy's recommendation to the President and subsequently to Congress to rescind the law that said Navy women could not, and Marine Corps women could not serve in combat units. It was the last remaining gender discrimination law in federal statutes, which this was 1992 now. And it was always a mystery to me that in the women's movement, along the many years, we all participated, rode through it. Nobody ever questioned the fact that Navy and Marine Corps women had a legal gender barrier. So in late 92, the law was changed and the Navy was changed. And so today, as a result, you have women serving in combat and women serving in combat commands. Aircraft carrier is now commanded by a woman, nuclear powered aircraft carrier. Along the way, after the tailhook scandal, the Navy decided that we needed to get some women out in the public war and talk about the great progress. It's great progress. So my next job in 1993 was to become the commander of Navy recruiting. So I was the chief recruiter for the US Navy. And the reason I was given that job was because they thought I could talk on TV well. And that was what the job entailed. I mean, I had a command that had about 2,000 people all around the world. We were recruiting in the Philippines and in Europe, military dependents and civilians in Europe as well. But a large part of the job was speaking out about opportunities in the Navy, not just for men, but now for women as well. And my boss had a tapestry behind his desk chair. So 3 days a week, we'd have a meeting with him sitting around the desk. And the tapestry said, "Bloom where you're planted." And I wish somebody had given me that advice early in my career. And I think it's so relevant to, especially to young people today. I'm a mentor for a University of Florida student. And sometimes I just have to encourage her to settle in, embrace what she's taken on, and do a superb job, and not worry quite so much about the next job and whether the next job after that is going to get her the rocket ship launch to this incredible future. And I think back a lot on my own career, and I think, I was very fortunate because along the way, I loved what I was doing. And people asked me, what was your favorite job? It was always the one I was in at the time. And part of that, I think, is blooming where you're planted. And then you have so many supporters who want good things to happen for you. So I pass that on. If you're mentoring a young person, I think, and especially in the frenzy today with social media and everything else, it's a pretty good motto. So my last job in the Navy, as I was approaching almost retirement time, was to be the president of the Navy's graduate school in Monterey, California. Beautiful place, kind of like paradise. And one of the interesting responsibilities of the senior officer in any geographical region is to greet high-level people. So when Speaker of the House came, senators come. In Monterey, they came a lot for different things. But this was a particular day when Bill Clinton came, President Clinton came, and I was down there in you'll see that, watch when you see the president get off a plane, you'll see half a dozen people, and that's what happens. That's how that works. So that was kind of fun. And then all good things come to an end. That's my last ceremony before I retired in Monterey. Now, one of the things that I point out here, when the law changed and combat exclusion went away, somebody in the uniform system said, "Oh, now women should be wearing swords." So in the waning days of my career, I had to figure out how to rig my uniform, and that was no small feat, but it was kind of fun to finally have a ceremonial sword. Looking back over my career and thinking about going forward, and I answered a cold call. That's how I went to Girl Scouts. It was a letter addressed to women university presidents, which at the time probably in the 90s. And so I'm thinking about, and Girl Scouts invited me to interview, and I did, and they offered me the job. And I'm thinking about what's different and what's the same in the Navy and now in Girl Scouts or in any other position. And I think this captures it the best way I can say, and that's what's the mission of whatever it is, and then where do I fit into it? And most important, how do I add value? And I think that when you think about how many times you're in situations where somebody who's higher up in the chain is micromanaging and doing your job, kind of oppressive sometimes, I go back to this. What can I do, whether I'm on a small team at the lowest level, or I'm the CEO, what can I do that improves the opportunity for this unit to be successful, And if you're into reading leadership, I commend to you servant leadership, because I think that is, at least from my experience, about the best encapsulation of how a leader serves the people that work on the team or on the organization and removes the barriers to their success. So if you get everybody being as successful as they possibly can be, they know what the mission is and they're feeding into it, the leader's job is pretty straightforward, I think. So I went off to Girl Scouts and exchanged a Navy uniform for a Girl Scout uniform. And that was pretty thrilling. One of the things that my 4.5 years at Girl Scouts we wanted to do was make sure that girls had a better opportunity in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And then my personal issue was girls become fitter and have the opportunity for sports. So I did that for 4.5 years. And then one of the fun things was Parade Magazine. So the editor of Parade Magazine contacted us and said, "We think Girl Scouts is a good representation of taking charge of your life and doing it." So that was kind of fun to be on the first cover. But some of you remember Parade Magazine? Yeah. It was a good publication. And then I became the neighbor of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And that was very exciting to move into that iconic building. And Girl Scouts was an interesting step along the way from the point of view of nonprofit leadership and fundraising, which I really need to do when I was in the Navy. But again, it was the same thing. What's the mission? Where do I fit in? How do I add value? How do I remove the barriers to this organization's success? And that served me very well at the Red Cross. As you may know, I was in the Red Cross from 2002 to 2005. Historic hurricane years, historic. Katrina, Rita, Wilma, tsunami in Asia, substantial responding to that. And yeah, it didn't fail me at all to say, what's the mission? Where do I add value? How do I get out of the way of people who are professionals, really know their job, and let them get on with it? And I will tell you, in the Red Cross disasters, if your decisions are 51% right, it's a good day. Because it's as close to war. You don't know, you don't have a full picture ever. There are many, many issues you're trying to deal with, and you have to be so focused, so centered. So I retired from the Red Cross in 2005, retired for sure, except not really. And what happened here was, I was not a golfer, but what happened here is I had such a passion for girls getting into sports. When I was at Girl Scouts, we developed a partnership with LPGA to have LPGA women teaching professionals teach particularly underserved girls the basics of golf, gets them out of the circumstances onto the golf course for usually 8 lessons. And I became a golf junkie. I just developed a passion to watch these young women play golf and started going to tournaments just because they had invited us, so on. And then eventually I joined the board of the LPGA. And one day we were without a CEO and didn't have a full-time job at the time. So I came out of retirement in 7 months. And it just reinforced how important it is that women have opportunities. Women's tournaments pay a 10th, a 20th of what men's tournaments pay. And it's getting a little better, but it's still a passion. So that's my career. And the last point I would make is find your passion. I have a lot of passions. And First Tee is a youth character development organization that kind of builds on my whole career, golf, youth service, and so on. So that's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Marty. We are a little short on time, so I apologize. We don't have the opportunity to question right now. We are so fortunate to have Marty as a chaplain and share some of the history that she experienced as a woman. So many folks in her career having been the first woman. Thank you so much, Marty, and a few of us are going to be able to welcome Marty for coming all the way from Florida with one. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to Marcy. I am. Anne had covered for me when I was on travel earlier this year. So I'm actually supposed to be. So in light of time, this is a somewhat abbreviated general's message. So our President General wanted to express her wishes for happy holidays, and she hopes that December finds us well and surrounded by family and friends. The national headquarters has been decorated, sparkling and ready for all to enjoy. As some of you attended, we have the holiday open house on December 7th in Washington, D.C. And it was the first time that we are been able to come together for this annual tradition since 2019. And this month, she hopes that we will remember our active duty service members, our first responders, and veterans. And she hopes that we will consider gathering as a chapter to assemble care packages, reading materials, meals, or other items for those in our local community, or those who are serving abroad from our local community. And if anyone is looking for activities that are indoors due to the colder weather, this is also a perfect time to support ongoing DOR efforts like the indexing of records and the genealogical records. And every volunteer makes a difference in making these records accessible to others who are seeking to learn more about potential Revolutionary War and DAR. And finally, the executive officers for NSDAR wish you blessings and a holiday season filled with joy, love, and friendship. She is deeply grateful for each of us and our devoted service. And she said, we rejoice in our DAR ties and service. Susan, is that the manager of things? I think for Sonia today. Maybe kinds of things, or remembering Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941.
We all know the fate of the USS Arizona and the USS Utah on 7 December 41, along with the beautiful monuments that were built for each ship. You are aware that these two battleships are the only ones that remain where they sank in Pearl Harbor, which is a lasting tribute to the brave men who fought to the end. Of the sailors and Marines on board the USS Arizona, 900 were not recovered and 334 survived. The USS Utah lost 60, with only 2 being recovered and 461 surviving. Those who did not survive and served on board those two ships have the right to have their remains interred with their figures upon passing. The Navy began interring deceased Pearl Harbor survivors on their old ships in 1982, with the final one in 2019. The USS Utah had 3 interments. The USS Arizona had 44. The services for both were with full military honors. The 2 remaining survivors from the Arizona plan to be laid to rest with their families. Survivors from the other ships can have their ashes scattered over the Pearl Harbor. The last one that was done in 2019 took place on 6 December 2019 for Lauren Brunner, who was the 44th and last crew member to be interred. Burner said he wanted to return to his ship because few people go to cemeteries, while more than 1 million visit Arizona each year. He also thought it fit to join his old friends who never made it off the bush.
Thank you. Our minutes were posted from last month. Do I have some volunteers for reading this next one? Natalie and Susan. We can report. Since we're running late, I'm very short and fit in the region corner. I can't spend the news article all but one thing I did do was my daughter, if you remember, works for the brother of a major general that is stationed in Iran and Syria as a good community joint, and they asked for gifts, care packages. So I said, took me in on it and wasn't some part of the region, Suzanne,
The only thing I have for our meeting is a reminder that our chapter normally supports the Woodlawn Annual Needlework Show. And Kathy Bertram was contacted by them, so we are soliciting who could volunteer. And the show will be open daily from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And I believe, I don't have the specific dates here, but I believe we have a sign-up sheet that is on the table. So if there are any women who have done this, it's generally been a great opportunity to socialize, see some beautiful artwork, and I believe ladies also get together for it.
Kathleen? There was still a 5, 10, and 15 weeks. Treasurer, Bonnie? This is the budget for November, and we started out with 24,956. That means it said we just had one last member pay the dues, and a couple of yearbook purchases. Last month we made $137 on the back, and $40 for the PAL schools, for the school buses, which I'll pass around in a moment. And it is more expensive. So we had a total of $303 and paying for our deposit, and all of our expenses go. All of our national dues have been paid, the state dues have been paid, and We had a couple of refunds and payments for marine purchasing these microphones and our annual insurance payment. So we finished up the month of November with $17,045.50. And what's not reflected here will be on the next month's December's payment treasurer report is the magazine subscription. Those haven't been in the bank yet, but we paid everybody who we purchased subscription. That should take care of that, and I'm gonna, oh, and I have earbuds that people, for those who have already purchased them, and a few extras of $5 each. And I have the tax letters, thank you letters for those who really contributed to your meeting. Maureen?
I have no report at this time.
Terry, I missed you. Sorry.
Hi, this is Carrie in Tampa, and I'd like to welcome our visitors today. Is Christy Wagner there?
Yes.
Christy, could you stand up and introduce yourself?
Can you hear me, Carrie?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I stood up and let everyone know I was hearing my name. I just don't think you could hear me because I didn't have the microphone.
Okay, no worries. Welcome. Charlotte, do we have any other visitors today? Charlotte's shaking her head no, I see that, but someone's standing up. Okay, welcome, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, that's all I have for today. Thank you, Marcy.
How's Tampa?
Lovely, thank you.
We're going to be freezing tonight, and I'm hoping
And it's good to see Marty. I had a chance to visit with her up in Ponte Vedra at Thanksgiving.
good. Don? What is it? Here you have. Historian? And we're a little bit unrelated, but I have two things. So we are going to have a meeting coming January for the auction meeting. We will be sending out an email regarding that. Until the newsletter. And the other thing is, so we want to send big.
Oh, yes, point of information.
Good morning, ladies. I received this email from Teresa Schultz, which is from our is online. Yeah. Your generous order of items from the Amazon wish list. Patriot Pantry provides nourishment and everyday personal items such as food can be related to in need of these necessities. Gifts such as yours can truly make a difference in the lives of the community. Also, please allow us to express our many thanks to your purchase of equipment and supplies for our 3 school nurse. Items such as these are always welcome additions to our school nurses supply closets and the first aid kits kept by the physical education teachers and coaches. Thank you also for your gifts of school supplies that were included in your Amazon orders. This program gives a great boost to our students and families struggle to provide school supplies needed for the children and teenagers to come to class every day, prepared to study and learn. This gift is always needed and certainly most appreciated. Everyone at KESBA, our school, feels truly blessed to be a part of an educational institution that celebrates its history, fosters patriotic ideals, and promotes God, home, and country. And thanks to the collaborative efforts between the guard members of the community, alumni, and friends, we are able to ensure that our students' opportunities for success are hindered by personal and public. You, which has this, you are a part of something very special here, and we cannot thank you enough. Teresa King.
Librarian. Wearing local hats today. Our book club will be meeting in January on the 26th, at 7:30 via Zoom. And our book for January is Defiant Brides by Nancy Rubin Stewart. It's also in the newsletter. Please join us. And on another note, we have passed in the budget for $500 for gift certificates at Fisher House, which is over at Fort Belvoir, for the families of those who have either family member or themselves that are ill or at the hospital there at Fort Belvoir. And everybody's already kind of started that. There are 10 cards over there with a note. And with each note, we're having you all just sign your names. I've already put the little sentiment in. And each one of those cards will have a $25 food court gift certificate. The PX did not have the PX gift certificates when I went to get them, so we'll do that in February. Again, I'll do notes again. So the director named just no, it's a new person. Will be the person to decide how to handle that and give it to the most needy of the families that are. Okay, old business, Lisa Cross America, Linda. So people in Jim can hear you.
Okay, long time no see. Sorry I haven't been here. It's been very good in the fall. So thank you so much to Barb Evans for being my co-chair. She was our we had a couple of days here, but I was going to go with the way it is. We did have 112, and that will give us time. Thank you. And also want to let you know, I just got notification that they're doing the 2-for-1 again this year. Starting this coming Saturday, I was 17th, so 18th, through January 15th. If you order wreaths from our website, there are links, Wreaths North America, you will get 2 wreaths placed for every 1 wreath purchase. Now, we will still only receive the $5, but out of the 15 you pay for the 1 wreath, but we still get double our money as far as spreading joy and recognition. Try to honor this. So thank you again for your participation. As long as I reach it on me too, and Barb along my side, we'll keep it up. So thank you.
And you want to say anything about putting the leaves down at the.
Oh, it's 4,000.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
The 4,229 wreaths. At this time, we have enough wreaths. But don't feel like any money goes to waste. It will always does next year. And starts at 9:30. Do it as fast as they can. You can come in money and perform. Money is a pain. I would suggest you book about 9 to try to park in your year. That'd be a great year. And so we're going to be area that very real. Great. Rated down on 17th.
One time that we don't conflict with them.
Second base job now. Y'all are giving me stress. And I know you don't want to do that.
Well, to finish up the chart for the year. May mainly, just one rifle sales in March. The rest of it is April and May. Can I pass it around one more time? Fill in the blank. Barbara wanted me to talk to you about the Nelly pins. If you ordered them, haven't received them, give her a call. Armed Forces Return Holiday Party in Langley.
Ladies, I am the vice director of District 5, and the district director, Nancy Hill, has tasked me with the Armed Forces Retirement Home. Those of you who are attending the service, free, but have to be there by COVID. Who are on the access trust. We have 6 chapters participating. Nelly has actually provided the most volunteers. We are providing 8. The drill is that when you show up at 9 8, you will be on the access roster that is already given security to show your photo ID and your code. Okay. Then it is down the hill past Lincoln Summer Cottage to park, and you won't park by the building. You'll have to park below the hill and walk up the hill to the stop building. Once you get to the stop building, you have to go to a spot right there. They will take your temperature. They have to show them their COVID shot. We don't have to wear a mask. A mask. From there, you walk down the hallway. The elevator is going to be on the right-hand side. You go down 1 floor, step out of the elevator, and do about 1 o'clock, and the recreation hall is. And they're expecting about 85 residents. We have provided, District 5 has provided 245 gifts. They're excited about that. Secret Santa has said that this was probably one of the better years. So I can only say for those of you who have donated through Amazon, and this is something new, but also we cut the chase, so no one chapter had to have storage units in order to maintain and keep the gifts until they were transported over. They were directly delivered to Amanda at the and she was delighted, and I was delighted. I have the access roster. I'll take my cell phone. If you get to the front gate and somebody gives you problems, just give us a ring. And I will probably leave a copy with the guard at the main gate in case it doesn't have one. And you know how that has it. You've never been in an military. It's don't always have it. Any questions of me? Well, you have to show your coverage. You have to show at least 2. Boosters are even better. They will smile at you for that, but they will take you. And that's what the current information. I had 5 boosters now. And again, December the 16th, 1 to 3, be there by 12:15. You're good to go. Wear your sparkling attire. I'm going to wear antlers. Any questions? Okay.
You want to talk about the Christmas hearing? Thank you, everyone, who voted for these for the Christmas ball. We have bagged up all the cookies there and bagged for everyone. State Congress is in March, and I think they sent out the information about the hotels. We can have 3 delegates to some point and 6 alternates. And there's some nominations for the delegate. Yes. Martin. John, that you did say okay. Thank you. Who is in? Who? Suzanne? Are there any more? That's that three. We do, yes, now we have to vote on them? Yes. Okay, we have three nominations for delegates, and they are Marty Evans, Ann Terrio, and Suzanne Gallagher. Do I hear any?
I second the motion.
Do I have any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, now we have 6 alternates that we need. Open for those. Who's going? Yes? Yes? Nobody?
Yeah. Linda. Nominate Pamela Reed.
Who else is going? Who thinks he might go? Who thinks maybe he might go, Kathleen? Does someone want to, yes? I know. That was quick, guys, and we usually have it a lot longer. Okay, do I have a motion that is, okay, thank you. All in favor of receiving our alternates? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
What is our total membership?
It's 146. So we have 2 delegates plus myself, that's it. So
Yeah.
get it a little farther on, a little bit more. Okay, announcements. In February, we're going to do the museum, and Suzanne and I are trying to see if we can do more than this 10 on Monday, and if not, we'll have a second shoot.
What are these?
The National Army Center. The next meeting is Mary Lindsay from Work Historic Society. She's going to speak on cemetery at the meeting. Chaplain, hold on. Please bow your head. Dear Lord, don't let us miss you this Christmas season. Help us to simplify our activities and traditions so that we can focus our celebration on your birth. Thank you for being the Prince of Peace, and I ask you for that supernatural peace to reign in our hearts. Thank you for the simple but life-changing message of your love for us. In Jesus' name.
We have a rush.
Yes. Yes, we're gonna have a raffle. We did have them first because y'all all get noisy. And we wanted to make sure that we can have all the fun you wanted to. So, raffle, who's doing the raffle?